So good evening, everyone. It's really my great pleasure to be here. And perhaps I should first of all ask, can you hear me okay? You can hear me okay? Maybe I can. Can you hear me now? Is that better? I think that's much better. Yes. So just to begin, I would like to invite everyone just for 1 minute of silence. Can we just have 1 minute of silence? Thank you. If everyone can sit down, and I hope everyone has translation, okay. And if we, just from now, let's have 1 minute of silence. So thank you so much again, everybody. It's really my great pleasure to be with you tonight. And I actually grew up in Melbourne. And when I was a child, I'm not sure it's still true, but I used to be told that outside of Greece, Melbourne had more people or more Greeks living there than any country, any other city in the world. I don't know whether that is still true, but that's what we used to hear. What I would love to do tonight is just share some of my thoughts, and there will be some time for some questions, and we will finish with some meditation. But I just want to make sure that everyone is getting translation okay. Is it okay? Because there seems to be some people who are not quite organized. Do you mind waiting 1 or 2 minutes just for... Can it be louder? If I talk like this, is that better? Maybe I can pull the chair forward a little bit. Some of the front. It's okay, I can, it's okay. So thank you everyone for your patience. We live in an extraordinary world. There's 8 billion human beings, 195 countries, 6,500 spoken languages in our world, and 4,500 practiced religions. Seeing our world, seeing all the change in our world, seeing all the chaos in our world, all the diversity in our world, and all the differences in our world, I wonder how you are feeling, how you are managing. Because the reality is we seem to be living in an increasingly violent world. And violence seems to be a part of almost everything in our lives today. And on the macro scale, there's so much violence, as we know, so many wars in our world. And these wars have different reasons. Sometimes it's political, sometimes it's economic, sometimes it's ethnic, and sometimes it's religious. And once I met a professor of religion who told me that in history, he did a study And he believed that 78% of all wars were begun by religions. I wouldn't be surprised. So there's so much violence in the macro world, but even we know there's so much violence in every home today, or many homes today. There's sexual violence, there's psychological violence, there's emotional violence, there's mental violence. There's just a world of violence in which we're living in. And, you know, my own story, I actually had an experience in my life when I was just 17 years old that really sort of changed the direction of my life. I think you all know that sometimes we have experiences that really change your whole view of everything. And I was just 17, and I, as a teenager, was often involved in social activism, was very active in social movements. And I went to the capital of Australia, that's Canberra, to a university festival. And at the time, Australia was involved in the Vietnam War. Australia was supporting America in the Vietnam War. So I went on an anti-war march, a peace march it was called, with some of my friends. And as we started to march, some of them got excited. There was thousands of students, and I was arrested and I was put in jail. And I was just 17 years old. And there was 200 young people. And you know, it was the 1970s, and those of you from that era, we sang for a few hours, you know, John Lennon songs, All we are saying is give peace a chance. I can see some of you remember that. But actually, when it quietened down, when the whole of the singing quietened down, there was a lot of conversations going on. And I was just 17. I was sitting in the corner of the cell, and these were the leaders of the peace movement in our country. And as I was listening, I realized that we were such an angry, aggressive, and negative group of people. And here we were sort of demonstrating for peace and non-violence, and yet in our attitude and our speech, there was just so much violence. And actually, it really changed my thinking. I'd been on a spiritual journey anyway, but it really made me realize that unless we change, the world won't change at all. And I began to really research the seeds of violence in myself, because I began to realize that all of us carry the seeds of violence in ourselves. And as I began to research that, I began to observe the international media and how every day we look at our phones and we look at the television, we look at the computer, we see so many images of violence on so many levels. But that's like the outer world, if I can say, the world we perceive through our senses, the world we see, the world we hear, the world we touch, the world we feel, the material world. But there's another world, which is our inner world. Our world of thoughts, our world of feelings, our world of emotions, our world of attitudes. And I would say that world is just as powerful as the external world, this inner world. And sometimes I have it in my mind that there's 8 billion human beings, as I was saying. And in science, they say that on an average day of 16 hours, the human mind can think up to 70,000 thoughts in a waking day. So I sort of imagine that each of those 8 billion are pumping thoughts into the atmosphere. It's almost like we're living in a thought soup. We all co-create this thought soup. And this thought soup really influences all of us. And really, you know, we're seeing an increasingly violent world. But what is feeding that? What is feeding the violence in our world? I would say it's the collective human mind, the collective human mind, the collective human consciousness. When the collective human mind is full of greed, We've created this materialistic culture which is really destroying our environment. And in fact, human beings are now so violent to this beautiful world which we love. When the collective human mind is full of ego, we're just full of self-interest, and there's no real care or compassion for our fellow human beings, so violence towards others. When the collective human mind, when all of us have so much fear, then we feel threatened by people who think differently to me, who look different to me, who behave different to me. And when the collective human mind is really full of anger, we have this world which we know, which is so full of peacelessness, conflict, and violence. And I really do feel that those of us on a spiritual journey, and I imagine most of us here, have that feeling that when I take responsibility to actually change the quality of my thinking, to put a new quality of thought into the thought soup, genuine thoughts of peace, of love, of respect, then we begin to change the atmosphere of our world. I think all of us want nonviolence. All human beings want nonviolence, but each one of us has to take responsibility. And what is nonviolence? You know, Mahatma Gandhi, and I'm sure many of you have read a lot about his life. He used to call nonviolence a superpower, a superpower. And violence has the intent to harm others physically. But nonviolence has the intent to offer compassion and love to others. But just like there's many layers of violence, there's layers of nonviolence too. And it's like it's on the surface, we become nonviolent to others physically. That's the sort of gross form of nonviolence. But the subtle form of nonviolence is really, not to harm others mentally. Even creating negative thoughts, angry thoughts, hurtful thoughts. We all know thoughts have an energy. And all of us sitting in this room can feel the energy of violent thinking. But I would say the refined form of nonviolence is not to have harmful thoughts for the self. And really, I would say, look at our world. Wherever you go in the world today, it seems like our world is so broken and so dysfunctional. Why? Because the first relationship in life, the relationship of me with me, has become so unhealthy. It's become so dysfunctional. And when this most intimate relationship, how I treat myself, how I look at myself, how I understand myself, if that is really fractured and broken, then that pollutes each and every part of my life. It affects my physical health. It affects how I feel in my mind. It definitely affects my relationships with others. And it really affects my performance at work. It absolutely affects everything. So I would say that the seed of violence is really how I treat myself. And I remember many years ago in Australia, I was on a panel with a Buddhist monk. And I think, as you know, Buddhism is very strong about nonviolence. And there was a discussion about the violence in our world, the violence in our relationships. And we all came to the conclusion that the seed of violence begins in the way I treat myself. And I need to ask my heart, how do I treat myself? What sort of thoughts and feelings do I create about myself? Am I loving? Am I kind? Am I respectful? Am I compassionate? Am I forgiving? Or do I sometimes have this self-talk where I put myself down, I criticize myself, I keep telling myself that I'm no good, I'm inferior, I'm hopeless? Because when I'm thinking in that way, I'm in a sense sowing the seeds of violence against myself. And really, I would say that the most violent act I can do is to reject myself. And sometimes we do that, seeing my own behavior, seeing my attitudes, seeing my mistakes, seeing my failures, I reject myself. And I would say that the whole of spirituality is really about healing this first relationship with myself, beginning that healing process. And for me, the first step towards a non-violent life, if I can say, or rebuilding a world of non-violence in myself, is to really experience who I am. And in my own inner journey, and I've been a meditator now, a daily meditator for about 48 years. You know, wonderful thing about meditation is you really observe your inner world and how you work. And in my observation, there's like 3 personalities inside of me. And I would say 2 of them are quite violent towards the self and even others. But one of them takes me down the path of inner peace and really starts to recreate a sense of non-violence. And the first personality I call the I of arrogance, the I of superiority. It's really my ego. And this personality takes its whole sense of identity from my body. Who am I? I see myself as, all the labels. I just identify with all the labels, my gender, my nationality, my religion, my profession, my age, hundreds of labels. And when this I is ruling in my inner system, I compare with others and I think that I am better, I know more, I am right. But when my ego is really dominating in my inner world, my ego is ruling my inner kingdom. When it comes into my feelings, that's when I feel so easily insulted, disrespected, not valued, excluded, sensitive. Anyone sensitive here? Oh. We're all very sensitive, right? And I would say it's a product of my ego. And when I'm under the influence of my ego, there's a deep relationship between ego and love. Fundamentally, the more ego I have in life, the less love I really feel. And the role of ego, it makes you feel separate. Ego makes you feel separate. Ego makes you feel separate from your true self, separate from others. I would say, a feeling of alienation and disconnection. And so when my ego is really ruling in my inner system, I'm so easily hurt by others, so easily insulted. I often have very negative and violent thoughts about others. But my ego is really a front for the second personality, I would say, which is my lack of self-respect or the ego of inferiority. And this personality also takes its whole sense of self from all the labels of my body. And when this personality is ruling, I compare with others. And I feel that others are better, others know more, others don't love me, others don't value me, others don't respect me. And so when I'm being ruled by my ego of inferiority, my lack of self-respect, that's when I feel so easily hopeless, inadequate, unworthy, inferior, I would say depressed. In psychology, depression is like a sadness that my dream in life to be loved and valued hasn't happened. But in spirituality, depression is like a mourning for the loss of my true identity. And so when my lack of self-respect is ruling my inner world, my inner kingdom, that's when I often have violent thoughts towards myself, really grossly negative thoughts, putting myself down, reinforcing constantly my own sense of inferiority. And so when my inner world is really dominated by my ego and my lack of self-respect, I fluctuate. One day I'm up, the next day I'm down. 1 hour I'm up, the next hour I'm down. I fluctuate enormously. The third I is the original I. And this is I, the soul. The soul is a wonder. The soul is the permanent self. And the soul is just a point. And in mathematics, a point exists, but it has no length, breadth, or width. I am the soul. The soul is just a point that sits in the front of the brain, in the center of the forehead, around the pituitary gland. The soul has lived before this body. The soul will continue after this body. And as I begin to build up a relationship with myself as a soul, when I'm aware of who I am, I'm experiencing who I am, I have a natural sense of inner peace. It's like coming home to a place inside where I really feel I belong. I don't have to prove myself. I don't have to, put pressure on myself in any way. I really begin to accept myself internally. And so that first step, I would say, to, building non-violence in myself is to really know and experience who I am. And many times I feel that, the aim of meditation is not to be peaceful. The aim of meditation is to know and experience who I am, and the automatic byproduct is a peaceful and more non-violent self. And sometimes I think of my inner world like a tree. A tree has a seed, a trunk, branches, and leaves. My thoughts are the leaves. On a huge tree, how many leaves are there? So many thoughts are there. But what is feeding my thoughts are the branches, and the branches are like my mental and emotional patterns. They can be my worry, my fear, my anxiety, my depression. But what is feeding the branches is the trunk. And the trunk is like my subconscious. Freud said that 90% of my behavior is influenced from my subconscious. But the seed is my sense of identity. It's my sense of who I am. And when the seed is false, when I sow a false seed in my inner world of who I am, then it influences the trunk, it influences all the branches, my mental and emotional patterns. And it also, I'm just getting some signals from the back to slow down a little bit. And it influences my thoughts, my mental and emotional patterns, negativity, anger, hurt, fear, all those sorts of things. But when I actually sow the seed of truth in my inner world, that I am an eternal soul, an immortal soul, a non-physical being, a point source of life energy residing in the front of the brain. When I sow that seed of truth, it influences my subconscious. It influences all my mental, emotional patterns, and my thoughts on the top are much calmer and much quieter. And so that first step, I would say, in rebuilding a sense of non-violence in myself is to really sow the seed of a true awareness of who I am. The second step, I would say, on the journey to non-violence is really the experience of true love. And I feel of all the things I value in my life, it's really the experience of love. I've observed myself, as I was saying before, that's the spiritual journey. When the heart is full of love, I feel so easy. That lovely feeling where you feel so easy and relaxed about who you are, content. And my attitude to others is definitely a lot more understanding and compassionate. But when the heart lacks love, the heart's not tasting a quality of love, The mind can never rest. The agitated mind is always searching, seeking. Something is missing. Something is missing. The first need in life is love. The first desire in life is love. And if that desire is not really satisfied, then I feel so many other desires begin to merge into my mind. The desire for respect, the desire for recognition, the desire for power, the desire for control, all these things that seem to build violence into our world. And I think the subtext of human life, in a way, is the search for true love. We invest our heart in relationships. And you think in life we give everything in our relationships, in our family, in our friends, etc. But there's a huge human dilemma, and that is that no relationship is permanent. Whether it's time, whether it's change, whether it's conflict, whether it's death, no relationship is permanent. And this creates so much fear and insecurity in all of us. And this is why really spirituality explores the one relationship that's permanent, the relationship with God, the relationship with the divine. And often I feel there's three sources of love in life: the self, God, my family and friends. As I was saying before, I think the relationship with the self is so broken today. And really, that's why our world is like it is. This chaotic world out there is a reflection of the broken relationship almost all of us have in here. The second, the relationship with God. Many people have faith in God, but I'm not sure we really experience that real love, intimate feeling of closeness with God. So my one source of love is my family and my friends. So if there's a loss or if there's a conflict, a difference, a separation, it's like my whole world goes into chaos. What is spirituality? What is spirituality? I would say that spirituality is first having a loving relationship with myself as the soul, that spiritual being. And second, a loving relationship with God. And what this is doing, it's like relaying a platform within myself to reconnect with my true peace and my original non-violent nature, my original loving nature. And this relationship with God. You know, when I wake up every morning, I meditate every day, like I'm sure most of you do. And what I love to do is really sit down and, in a sense, go through a process of letting go the consciousness of my body, stepping back and withdrawing from all the temporary labels, and just feel the soul, the consciousness sitting lightly in the forehead. I love this feeling because as you do, you go beyond all the labels of difference in our world that create so much violence, the labels of gender, the labels of age, the labels of culture, nationality. We know all those things. And I become a soul. And in a sense, I begin to see that everyone else is a soul too. But then I begin to look through the eye of the mind, and I see God through the eye of the mind. And I see God as light, a radiant jewel of light. And just as I am a soul, I see God as a soul too. But I'm a soul that does actions. And when I do actions, I know happiness and I know sorrow, like all of us in this room. We've all tasted total happiness at some point, and we've all tasted complete and utter sorrow at other points. But God is a soul like me. God is not just a concept, a belief, an intellectual idea, but a real living being, but a soul that's changeless, a soul that is uninfluenced, and a soul that retains all the power of love, of peace, of purity, etc. And in a sense, meditation is reconnecting with my fundamentally true self and then reconnecting with the divine. How do I do that? Through my thought energy. Even as you're sitting here tonight, as I'm speaking, how many places has your mind traveled to? How many people have you connected with? You know how you sit here and you're listening, and yet someone pops in your mind, a child, a partner, a parent, a friend. Because we are constantly receiving these thought messages. The wonder of our thoughts is that our thoughts are beyond time and space. They're instant. Light travels at 186 miles a second, which is incredible, but thoughts are instant. So a thought of someone in America reaches you instantly, and you are constantly giving and receiving on this thought level. It's the same process with God. I have a real living connection with this being. And this is really the source of so much inner strength, to be able to let go the addiction to negative thoughts about myself, negative thoughts about other people, negative thoughts about my situation in life. In other words, a mentality of violence, because I begin to create quality thoughts in my mind. And yet, in saying that, my own experience recently, and I imagine most of us here are meditators. And, you know, in the country I live, honestly, meditation is so mainstream. At the universities, at the schools, in the kindergartens, in the workplaces, they teach meditation. In some universities, every single student, 50, 60,000 students, is offered meditation, because we know that the mental health of humanity is so challenged. And yet I find that people yearn to meditate, yearn to taste that quality of peace. I've been asked to slow down again. Yearn to really taste those feelings of peace. And yet, to be very honest, I think most people find it very difficult. And so many people try meditation, but in a sense feel they're a failure at meditation. I can't do it well enough. And so we yearn to experience it, but we find it very difficult. And this is why really in the Brahma Kumaris, when we meditate, we talk more about remembering. Why? Because remembering is natural. At every millisecond of life, I'm remembering what I have to do, what I just did, what you said, what I said. And when you remember, three things happened. It's like a subtle thread from your intellect connects with a person. The instant you connect, you remember a person, a situation, a memory, you're influenced by that, whatever you connect with. And the instant you're influenced, you download a feeling inside. And so what is happening? Our mind is plugging into this memory. I'm influenced, I download a feeling. I plug into a personality. I'm influenced, I download a feeling. If you remember someone you love, you have a really close, loving relationship. The instant the subtle thread of your mind, your intellect touches them, you're influenced by that love and you feel relaxed, you feel calm inside. But if you remember someone you're in conflict with, you're not getting on with them, there's differences. The instant you travel and plug into that thought, you're influenced by that conflict, by the differences. And inside you feel hurt. And then we start the flow of negative thoughts, either about the person, about the situation, about the self. So we keep triggering the violent reactions within myself. And if I remember God, and really in a sense, meditation is remembering the true self and beginning to remember God too. And as I turn my mind and I connect with the divine and I remember that love, that peace, I'm influenced by that. And it's like I live stream the energy of the divine into myself. And this vibration sustains me, sustains the atmosphere around me. You know how some people you meet, they've just got a whole aura about them. Because when my mind is on that vibration, it's like your mind is like a perfume. Your mind fills the atmosphere with peace and can even change the violent thoughts of other people around you just by you being in that elevated state of peace. And so I would say that when I sit to meditate, I first begin by connecting to my eternal self, my true self. And that opens the door to a state of true peace. I then connect with the divine, the supreme, and that opens the feeling to a quality of love. And when I rebuild these two feelings inside myself, it's almost like my inner world becomes more and more non-violent. The more I become non-violent, my attitude to people, my behavior towards people really begins to change. And someone who has a non-violent mind, other people feel comfortable. You know how sometimes you're with some people, you feel really easy. Some people, when you're with them, you feel a bit uncomfortable, you feel tense because of the quality of their thoughts. We all zone in and we feel those thoughts. And so really, when I lay this platform in myself, it's like I'm rebuilding a non-violent state within myself. And I feel this is a huge way, huge offering to make the world a better place. Because when I build a relationship with my true self, a relationship with the divine, the automatic consequence is I become a lot more compassionate towards others. And, you know, compassion is really one of the most beautiful qualities, human qualities. It's a form of kindness, it's a form of respect, it's a form of love, in a sense, for others. Rather than offering negative thoughts, I offer compassionate thoughts and I offer understanding. And you know how sometimes in life, I think we make assumptions about other people. We don't really know why they behave in the way they do. We make a lot of assumptions. And there's a lovely story that I heard about a man on a train, and he had 2 children. And the children are running wild in the train, screaming, yelling, jumping on the seats. And the other passengers were getting very upset, not with the children, but with the father, the man. And one person just snapped at him and said, "What sort of father are you? Look at your children, they're creating chaos." And he was just staring out the window, taking no notice. And he turned around very slowly and quietly and said, "Oh, I've just come from the hospital and their mother just died." And so you know how we have all these thoughts, these violent thoughts, assumptions, criticism, negativity, but we often don't know the seed of why people behave. And as soon as he said that, all those people in that train, their thoughts changed instantly from criticism, negativity, to a real sense of compassion and love for that man who had just lost his wife and those 2 children who had just lost their mother. And it's like, I think that really, I feel in life now to really rebuild a non-violent attitude towards those around me by having good wishes and pure feelings. The mind is the most powerful instrument in the world. When it's negative, it's violent against the self and others. But when it's positive, it can change people. It can change their attitude. And it's like holding the value of other people in my attitude is one of the greatest gifts I can give them. And so compassion is such a powerful thing. Compassion is a form of understanding and empathy for the suffering of others. rather than judgment of the suffering of others. And actually, if you look at all the great religions of the world, compassion is one of the main things they talk about. You know, I'm not a great Bible scholar, but what did Christ say? Love thy neighbor as thyself. You know, once one of Buddha's followers said to him, asked him the question, would you say that compassion and loving kindness is a part of our teaching? And you know what Buddha said? No. I would say compassion and loving kindness is not a part of our teaching. Compassion and loving kindness is all of our teaching. And really, it's like that, isn't it? That I think life today is giving us all the message. The call of time for all of us at the moment is that we don't like what we see in the world out there, but the seeds of it are in all of us. And this is why I think, you know, during this incredible time of change, change is exponential at the moment. What is the message to all of us? The message is I can't change the world out there, but I can change my reactions to the world out there. I can change my thoughts and my feelings. This is what spirituality is about. And this is where I think, you know, to take up a practice, a spiritual practice, take responsibility for my thinking and my attitude. I'm doing my little bit to help move the world to a more positive place and a less violent place. And I often feel that there's probably, I would say, 3 ways of approaching a spiritual life. The first is like a hobby. And that's when, you know, occasionally when I feel like it, I do a bit of meditation. I come along to a talk like this. It's nice. But often when we walk out the door, you know what happens? We forget. The second type is as a discipline. I find today a lot of people are trying to meditate as a discipline. But what actually happens is that you sit to meditate, you maybe feel a bit more peaceful. But as soon as you finish meditating, your mind reverts to its old thinking. You just go back to your old perception of yourself and others and your old thinking. But the third type is really as a lifestyle, where I build a structure into my daily life to sustain me as a person. And I feel that's, to me, meditation is not something you do morning and night. Meditation is like an attitude to life. It's a decision. I'm going to change my non-violent, I'm going to change my violent nature. I'm going to live as a peaceful soul. Who am I? I'm going to take my spirituality into my relationships and into my life. And this is why really we meditate with our eyes open. Because often what happens is our spiritual practice is on here and my other life is here. It's like I have 2 lives in a way. But when I meditate with my eyes open, it's like I create this elevated state of mind and I take it into my daily life and into my relationships and into my family. So anyway, I think I will wind up there. I'm looking at the time, but if anyone would like to ask something, ask any questions, please feel free. You'll be most welcome. Thank you. I would say that's at the heart of spirituality, is to heal this dysfunctional relationship with myself. And as I was really saying, because I see myself as a temporary body, that's the seed of it's temporary, it's a false relationship in a sense. So I have to, if I really want to heal this relationship with me, I have to connect with my authentic and real self. And that's why really the practice of soul consciousness, which is the awareness of living in a state of self-awareness, the more I become self-aware, my ego, which is always deceiving my thinking, and my lack of self-respect. I often think of the self-awareness as the middle path, my ego here and my lack of self-respect. And they're always fluctuating. But the more I rebuild my inner self and I have a relationship with myself as a soul, the effect of that is that I develop a sense of self-value and self-esteem. You know, if I lack self-respect, which every human being does today, we then build this facade, this ego to protect that vulnerable me. And if, you know, I lack self-respect, can I respect others? Can I respect society? Can I respect the world? I can't. And automatically, as I start to have a relationship with myself as a soul, and I feel the love of God, I just don't sort of focus on God in an intellectual way or a belief only, faith, but I have a real living relationship. That starts to heal the broken relationship with myself. And as much as I have self-respect, I can respect others. As much as I have self-respect, I will be humble. I would say that the expression of someone with self-respect is they're humble. As much as I have self-respect, I will be loving and people love me. So the whole of the spiritual journey is really healing the relationship with me by having a relationship with the divine. And you know, one of my good friends on this journey, you know, we all have friends where we share about our transformation and growth. And you know, this challenge, I'd say everywhere, to feel good about myself. I feel that's the seed of all the dysfunction in the world. It's the hardest thing. You can go to the bookshops, there's thousands of books improving self-esteem, improving self-respect, etc. But we came to the conclusion the most powerful thing to heal this relationship is to allow myself to be loved by God. And when I really allow myself to be loved by God, that power sort of opens out that self-respect, you know, within myself. This is the journey of spirituality, but it's step by step. And I always remember something, I think many of you know Daddy Jenki. Many of you know Daddy Jenki. She's been here so many times. Now, once she said, I heard her say, you need 3 things on the spiritual journey. The first is patience. The second is patience. And guess what the third one was? You know, we do need a lot of patience, don't we, with ourselves in the process of transformation. Because to really heal, you know, there's a whole thing today about most human beings have trauma. Most of us have trauma from our life, and to heal ourselves of these things takes time and patience, but the greatest power is a relationship, a real, living, loving relationship with God. I often call God the lover of the soul. And when I really come close to the lover of the soul, the internal power you get to face yourself and really change yourself is extraordinary. Nothing else can give you that sense of internal strength. You know, it's an interesting thing, though, what you say, because what I've found that we have many, many, many questions about many things in life, but when you learn to meditate and when you learn to experience, what I found is that often when people sit to meditate, we just think. You know, we just think in a positive way, and it makes me feel a bit better temporarily. But actually, real meditation is the art of becoming like a bodiless soul, really aware of myself and the connection with God.
Many voices are on.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Many voices are on.
Yeah. And so when you experience, you can begin to answer your own questions, really. And I feel we have all the reservoir, all the information in here, but the more I experience in meditation, we can answer our own questions internally. You know, I do feel that sometimes we feel so vulnerable, so sensitive, so delicate, so fragile. To protect that inner, delicate, fragile me, that vulnerable me, I build the shell of ego. And ego is sort of a front that I present to the world. Like often more and more we create an image to present to the world. But after a while, I identify with that image myself. And I don't feel we have to fight the shell of ego or even fight my sense of vulnerability and sensitivity, you know, really engage. What I have to do is really reconnect with myself as the soul. And the more I reconnect with the soul, the shell starts to sort of slowly disintegrate and disappear, and the lack of self-respect. So it's more about rebuilding myself spiritually as a soul, and then the effect of the shell that I've built up there, and that sensitivity and vulnerability gets less and less powerful over me. But as we said before, everything takes time and patience.
I have an additional question.
To begin this journey, I need to reconnect with my permanent self. Just visualize yourself as the soul, a tiny point of life energy sitting in the center of the forehead, in the front of the brain. Just hold this image of yourself, the eternal self. The more I experience who I am, I taste the true feeling of peace. I am a peaceful soul. Just feel your mind cooling down, calming down. The more I create thoughts of my true self, I taste the essence of the feeling of peace. And in this state of soul consciousness, just look through the eye of your mind and visualize the form of the divine, of God. Visualize a radiant jewel of light, radiating vibrations of pure love. Just hold this image in your mind. And allow yourself to experience these vibrations. Just feel these vibrations entering the core of your being. Divine love, pure love, a love that heals and transforms. And the more I taste this quality of love, how do I feel about myself? The relationship with me begins to heal. My thoughts about my mistakes, my failures, my weaknesses begin to give way to thoughts of self-respect, of self-love, and of self-value. This love is changing my habit of violent thoughts towards myself. The thoughts of love and respect. And as my thoughts change towards myself, I have the power to generate benevolent thoughts for others. My mind becomes like a perfume that spreads elevated feelings in the atmosphere. The more I know who I am, connect with the divine, I have good wishes and pure feelings for others. To meditate regularly is an act of love for myself. Thank you.